that good?
Yep.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, thank you for your presentation. That was wonderful. Enjoyed learning about how you think about laying out a 90-day plan, understanding that the transition obviously it's not end of September, you're full on. You know it all. But yeah, if you want to do that, it's all right.
We'll try.
So we have a bunch of questions here. We, between board members, staff, students, community members, we have 70 questions. We will not give you 70 questions. Promise you will not have to rapid fire them. But what we will do is we'll take turns asking questions, and we'd like to sort of, so you understand what we're doing. If they're in different groups, so somebody might say what group it's from or what page it's on, just so we can sort of keep track of who's asked what. But that'll not matter for you. So, and we'll just sort of go in order like we did previous time, if that's okay with everybody. And actually, to make things fair, maybe we'll start at this side with CJ this time.
Sounds good. Well, I'd like to start with an open-ender, and really less from, I think, us, but more maybe from our community standpoint, and that is, Mr. Hills has done a good job of giving us information about difficult situation with two students in Mason where you're currently at. We have a very supportive, intelligent community who has also found things published and what information is available. So I just wanted to give you time. Obviously, there's a lot of things that can't be said. There's a lot of things ongoing, all of that. But just whatever you would tell us all about that scenario.
Thank you, I appreciate that opportunity. I would start by saying, as you said in the question, I cannot get into the specific instances of any matter involving students, but I can speak to the process that we utilize. So, like every school district, we have very clearly articulated board policy that stipulates how we handle disciplinary situations involving students. It's clear how we'll address behavior that may result in suspension or expulsion, and then if expulsion, what that reinstatement process looks like. So as a superintendent, one of my primary responsibilities is to develop guidelines. So as an administrative team, how will we handle the different pieces of the process? Investigation. If the investigation results in a finding that there is student misconduct that warrants suspension, what does that process look like? And then how does the suspension piece work? How does expulsion work? So guidelines. And then to ensure that we follow them with fidelity. So my job is to ensure that we have good policy or good guidelines in place, and that they are consistently utilized in every situation. And I can say that we do that. So we have very well-trained administrators. They conduct comprehensive, fair investigations of student behavior. When behavior warrants suspension, they follow our policy and guidelines. And my job is also to work with the board if we find ourselves in a situation that could result in an expulsion. So we follow our policy, which is aligned to the Michigan Revised School Code, and there's a hearing. We make an administrative recommendation. The board considers it and then takes the action they feel is appropriate. Same with reinstatement. So 150 days after the expulsion, the student has a right to request, or student's family has a right to request a reinstatement. There's a committee that considers factors detailed in both the school code and our policy. The committee makes a recommendation, and the board gives it consideration and takes action. So that's what it looks like, and we follow policy. And I'm very proud of the way our team operates consistently.
Thank you. All right, this might be a little wordy, but I'm asking anyway. So belonging in schools directly affects student achievement, and that is proven data. And there are populations such as the LGBTQ plus community, students that have been through trauma, newcomers to the we prepare students for their futures beyond FHPS, where DEI competency is increasingly valued in global workplaces? How do you plan to support and advance our commitment to DEI?
So first, I would want to learn. I would want to know more about what has happened in Forest Hills already. How successful has it been? What are some opportunities we have to move forward as an organization? How can we take very intentional steps to include every student in the district, regardless of the story they bring to school with them each day? And that story could be racial, it could be gender, it could be socioeconomic status, it could be religious, it could be sexual identity. There are all kinds of different forms of diversity, but our responsibility as a school district is to include every student and to ensure that there is equitable opportunity regardless of that story. So it's difficult for me to say what we would do, but I take that responsibility very seriously. I would just note progress in Mason Public Schools. So to be completely fair and transparent, one of the things that was appealing to me when I pursued that position was a very obvious public statement by the board of its commitment. So I knew that going in. So in the first year, I met regularly with our director of student support, so I think plays a very similar role to that very long title that you read. I don't think I could repeat, but I think very likely a very similar position. In Mason, his office is right next door to mine. So we meet regularly. One of the first things we did was to plan I apologize. We planned a PD series for our administrators. So a year-long series of capacity building, because our administrators are expected to lead that effort in their buildings and their departments. And we had never really given them opportunities for their own growth. I had that opportunity when I was a young principal in Okemos, way back in like 2012, I think. And it was a long journey for me. You know, I thought I was very equitable when I was a young administrator, when I realized that not so much. You know, my thinking at the time was, I treat everyone the same. Well, no, that's not necessarily equitable. So we have to help our leaders if we're going to expect them to lead. So we developed a PD series. We dedicated half of our administrative meeting time for the year, and those administrators are now enacting their equity plans that they developed as a capstone part of that year. So that's happening in all of our schools. I'm looking forward in May, their end of the year reports that they'll share in our leadership team meeting of how their projects went and next steps that they face. So that was last year. Additionally, we have a DEI committee in Mason, and it consists of a lot of different employees as well as a good number of community members. And they had planned an event that they ran for 2 years in a row. One, the March prior to my arrival, one last March, and it was called Mason Moves Forward. And it was a series of different DEI conversations, activities, and it was great. But it was on a Saturday morning, and the 100 or so people who attended were the people that were already well informed, and so it didn't really have as much impact as we wanted. And that's where the idea for our Inclusion Week that just happened last week was born. We were looking for an opportunity to impact students directly. So my good friend RJ Weber, who's the superintendent of Northfield Public Schools, mentioned the name of a special education teacher on his staff who really was the mastermind behind their Inclusion Week that they had already done once. She partnered with us and helped us learn how they got started, and we very successfully ran an Inclusion Week last week with a series of themes. Belonging was one of them, and developed grade level appropriate activities, and there was no pushback. We had a fair number of parents who wanted to take a look at the content of our slideshows, very fair. None that I'm aware of wanted to exclude their children. So very successful, and really just the start. So now our committee will be looking at how we can grow that program for a greater impact next year. So that's just an example of what we've done in Mason. But I would be utilizing the same process. Let's see what we've already done. Let's talk about the success of it. Let's consider opportunities for growth and greater impact in the future.
We've been a great school of choice for others in area districts. However, we do have students leave our district as well. What would your plan be to retain our resident children and to encourage more families to select Forest Hills for their children's education?
So the final part of that question, to encourage more families, are you referring specifically to the choice families that aren't attending now?
No, it's like we have students leaving our district as well, so how would we plan to retain our resident?
Our residents who are
Children
not.
to continue,
Okay.
yeah.
So I think we have to really listen. We have to understand how people in the community are feeling. I probably had 40 or 50 conversations in the foyer over the 90 minutes of the open house, and I began to learn about some of the things that are important to people in the community, and they were all different. So every parent or teacher had his or her own story. So how do we collect in some meaningful way those stories? Certainly have some ideas on how to go about doing that. One tool, and this is probably something that you'll ask another question, I can talk about this in response to a different question, so I'll give you the general version of it now. We're in the planning stages for an April implementation in Mason of a staff engagement survey. And this is a tool that I know is going to give us really valuable feedback about how our staff are feeling. But it is a first step because the tool that we're using there is also a community engagement survey. And I've never used it, but I have used the staff engagement piece before, and it's powerful. So that's one tool, but I think we need to understand as much as we can about what our community is looking for, but understand at the same time, we have 9,000 plus students in this district, and there are a lot of different reasons that people look for programming that we offer, or maybe something that someone else offers. I think we have to know that we're not going to meet everyone's needs, but we need to provide as much as we can, and we need to understand when students leave us, what are the reasons. So I'm not sure that was a complete answer to your question, but I think really beginning to understand what's happening and why students are choosing to not stay here